My wife simply wiped out our bank account while I was in a coma in the hospital after a serious accident. The worst part isn't even losing all my money. It's what came after. My name is David Monroe. I'm 55 years old, and not even in my worst nightmares did I ever imagine I'd wake up to something like this. When my car skidded on that cursed curve on Highway 65, everything went black. I didn't see the wet asphalt anymore, nor the trees spinning in front of me. I only remember the sound of shattering glass and then nothing. Waking up from a coma isn't like in the movies. There's no heroic scene with you slowly blinking while everyone cries around you with joy. None of that. It's confusing, slow, and every second feels like an eternity. The hospital light was dim on the wall in front of me, but it hurt like midday sun. The smell of alcohol, medicine, and disinfectant was so strong it felt like it was inside me, and the sounds were muffled, as if I were underwater. A constant beep reminded me I was still alive, but everything else felt like a dream, poorly stitched to reality. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and raw, like I'd swallowed sand. I only managed to mutter something unintelligible when a nurse noticed I was blinking more frequently. She ran over and pressed the emergency button. Within minutes, my room turned into a small war zone. "Mr. Monroe, can you hear me?" asked a doctor, his eyes wide with surprise. I only managed to nod slightly. They told me I'd been in a coma for almost 3 weeks. 3 weeks where the world kept spinning without me. 3 weeks in which, according to the nurses, my wife visited me every day. She came by early this morning, like always, a nurse said with a smile as she checked my vitals. But something was off. Something no one seemed to notice. Or maybe they just didn't want to tell me, because no matter how many times they said Lisa had been there, I never saw her, never heard her voice, never felt her hand in mine, never heard the familiar sound of her footsteps entering the room. I only found traces, a bouquet of flowers left on the table, which looked freshly bought from some random flower shop, and short notes written with a coldness that didn't match the 30 years we shared. "Hope you get better soon. Lisa." I read that note about 10 times. "No, I love you. No, I miss you. No, I'm waiting for you." The next note was even more impersonal. "I'll be back tomorrow. Need to sort out some things at the bank." Lisa. The bank? What bank? We had everything handled online for years. That began to hammer in my head. But maybe I was just hallucinating. Maybe it was the meds, maybe. Until George showed up. George is my nephew, my older sister's son, and one of the few people in the family I've always considered more than just a relative. He was always quiet, observant, the kind who sees what no one else does. When he walked into the room that day, he looked pale, his face serious, an old backpack slung over one shoulder. "Hey, warrior," he said, forcing a smile as he approached the bed. "Good to see you back." I tried to smile back, but all I managed was a slight twitch of the mouth. He pulled up a chair and sat next to me. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Like I got hit by a train, and then spat back onto the tracks. He chuckled softly, but the laughter didn't last. His eyes were red. And when he lowered his head and reached into his backpack, I felt something big was coming, something he was struggling to hold back. "George," my voice came out weak. "Lisa, has she really been coming here?" He hesitated for a second. That 1 second was all I needed. "She's been stopping by, yeah," he replied, looking at the floor. "But there's more, Uncle. A lot more." I closed my eyes, not from pain, but from fear, because in that moment I knew something had changed, something had broken, and it wasn't a bone. It was something much deeper. "Just say it," I murmured. "Tell me what it is." He took a deep breath. "While you were in the hospital, I had to go to your house a few times. Lisa asked me to pick up some papers, but Uncle, I saw things, heard conversations. At first I thought it was just in my head, but then I started digging." I raised my eyebrows, trying to stay composed. Digging into what? She opened a new account at another bank, just in her name. A year ago, before your accident. My stomach twisted. She's been transferring money from the joint account, sometimes small amounts, sometimes larger, but always regularly. And there's more. He took his phone out of his pocket, opened the gallery, showed me a photo. Lisa, sitting on a porch drinking wine with Jennifer, the neighbor. I blinked in disbelief. Is that edited? George shook his head. No, I took it this week. They're together, sleeping at your house, sleeping in your bed. I wanted to scream, to get up, to rip out the wires and run, but I couldn't even move my legs. And before you think it's just something recent, it's not. The secret account's card history shows dinners, short trips, gifts, since the week you went into the coma, maybe even before that. Uncle, she's not waiting for you to come back. She's living another life. My eyes filled with tears, not just from sadness, but from a venomous mix of anger, humiliation, and disbelief. And the notes? I whispered. The flowers? George gave a half smile. I think it's just for show. Just the bare minimum so no one suspects anything. I stayed silent for minutes that felt like hours. The world around me was spinning slowly, as if every revelation came in slow motion. Why are you telling me this? I asked finally. George looked up and met my gaze with a firmness I had never seen in him. Because you deserve to know. Because she left you to die and I won't sit by and watch. And because when you're stronger, there's more. A lot more you need to see with your own eyes. In that moment, I knew. Something was about to fall apart for good. Returning home from the hospital should have been a relief. It should have been a symbol of victory, a fresh start. But it was everything but that. The door creaked softly as George helped me push it open. The air was cold, stagnant, as if no one had breathed there for days. The lavender scent that Lisa always loved still lingered in the air, but it was a cold scent now. A soulless perfume. The house was clean. Too clean. Sterile. Almost like the hospital room I had just left. Every object seemed out of place. Or maybe it was too in place. The remote perfectly aligned with the edge of the coffee table. The cushions symmetrical, plump, as if they had never been touched. The emptiness of the house swallowed me slowly. She's not here, Uncle, George murmured, dropping my suitcase by the door. Where are her things? I asked, still standing, trying to hide the tremble in my hands. Some clothes are still here. The rest? Well, she took 3 suitcases the day she left. Said she needed time, that she wanted space to think. I laughed, a bitter, scratched laugh. Think? I repeated, more to myself than to him. Think about what? How to spend the money she took from me? George sighed. Maybe. I struggled to sit in the living room chair. It was my favorite, and for a second, I thought that at least there I would find some comfort. But I didn't. The chair no longer fit. Or maybe I had changed. In the following days, George came every day. Sometimes he brought food, other times just silence. And I needed both. He didn't ask questions, didn't pressure me, he just sat by my side and waited for time to do what it had to do. Until one Friday afternoon, he came back different. The sound of the key turning in the door was the same, but his steps were not. Slower, heavier. And when he entered, I knew something was about to happen. Uncle David, he began, not taking off his jacket. I brought something. From his worn backpack, he pulled out a brown envelope. Rough. No marks. Just my name handwritten on it. You'd better see this. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside, dozens of folded sheets. I started with one of the photos. It was Lisa and Jennifer. The two of them were sitting on a porch, toasting with glasses of white wine, smiling like love-struck teenagers. The golden afternoon sun illuminated their faces. Jennifer was wearing the blouse I had once complimented, and Lisa was in that blue dress she used to wear on our wedding anniversaries. I moved to the next one. Another angle. They were holding hands walking through a craft fair, laughing. Another photo. A candlelit dinner. The red candles, like the ones I used to light on special nights. The two of them leaning toward each other, faces too close for any excuse. My heart leaped and then plummeted. "That was last week," George said, his voice low. "Here in Springfield. That restaurant. It's the one on Jefferson Avenue, the one you took her to on your last anniversary." I tried to speak, but my throat froze. I felt my hand gripping the arm of the chair. I didn't even realize I was trembling until the envelope slipped from my lap. George bent down, picked up the papers, and handed me another. Bank statements. All in Lisa's name. A different account. A different bank. There were the deposits. Regular. Always on the same day of the month. They started exactly 12 months before my accident. "You said this started before the accident?" I asked, finally finding the strength to speak. George nodded. "Yes. A year before. The first deposits were small, like $100. Then they started growing. By the time you had your accident, she had already accumulated almost $7,000. Now, the account has over $20,000. Not to mention the withdrawals. By the way, they matched the dates of the restaurants, trips, and shopping." "She was getting ready to leave me," I murmured, more to myself. "Or protecting herself. Maybe she was expecting you to find something out, or just got tired of pretending." I fell silent. The words cut through me. The Lisa I knew, or thought I knew, was gone. Or maybe she had never existed. "And Jennifer?" I asked. "Do you think this was happening before?" George hesitated. "I think so. There are some messages on her phone. I managed to access an old email account she left logged in on the home computer. She sent pictures, said things." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I knew. I felt my chest tighten, not just from the betrayal but from the feeling that my entire history had been rewritten behind my back, that the nights of laughter, the anniversaries, the retirement plan, were just a backdrop to a play where I was the only one who believed in the script. "She left you, Uncle," George continued. But she did it with a smile on her face, like she had won something. I couldn't stay quiet. I took a deep breath. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. Not yet. The pain was too deep for tears. "And you? Are you sure about all this?" I asked, searching for a shred of doubt, a crack that would allow me to escape. George stood up. He went to the backpack and took out something else, a small camera. "I put this in her car last week. She and Jennifer went to a cabin in the mountains, the same one where you and Lisa spent your honeymoon." I narrowed my eyes. It was like a punch. "She took another woman to where we spent our honeymoon?" George nodded. I felt everything inside me collapse. There was no more ground beneath me, just the void. "Uncle David," he said carefully, "if you want, we can take all this to a lawyer. I've spoken to a guy. He said that if there's enough evidence, we can sue, ask for compensation, and more." I stared at the wall. The same wall where, years ago, I hung the first picture of me and Lisa, smiling in the park. Now it was no longer there. Nothing was. The only thing I could say was, "George, promise me one thing?" "Of course, anything. Don't let me forget this. Don't let me pretend it was just a nightmare." He placed his hand on my shoulder. "I won't. But I won't let you fall either." The following days were a blur, a whirlwind of anger, sadness, indignation, and above all, disbelief. I walked around the house like a ghost, stumbling over memories that seemed to have been left there on purpose to torture me. Every detail hurt. The marks from the frames she had taken off the wall, the empty space where our photo frame used to sit on the living room shelf, her favorite plates still stacked in the kitchen, like they had forgotten to take part of the setup. How could she, after everything we went through together? 30 years of marriage. 30 years. And all thrown away for a neighbor? Jennifer. The one who smiled too much and always had excuses to come borrow sugar, pick up the wrong mail, talk a bit because she was alone. I thought she just needed company, that she was kind. I even once told Lisa we should invite her over for dinner. Little did I know the two of them had been dining alone for a long time. What destroyed me the most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the coldness. George kept bringing evidence, silent but determined. He got everything: receipts, bank statements, screenshots, even GPS locations from Lisa's phone. While I was fighting for every breath in a hospital bed, she allowed herself to live. And not a contained life, a life of luxury, dinners, short trips, expensive hotels, gifts, spas, couples massages. One Tuesday afternoon, with the sound of the news low on the TV, George sat next to me with the laptop open. He clicked on a folder labeled Napa Valley. There were photos, videos, travel itineraries. They spent 5 days there, he said, pointing to the screen. They went to a wine festival, paid almost $1,000 a night at the hotel. What dates was that? I asked, already feeling my heart tighten. March 16th to 21. I fell silent. My eyes fixed on the screen, but only seeing my mind trying to piece things together. George, I spoke quietly. Do you know what's worse? What, Uncle? March 16. That was the day I had the lung infection. I almost died that night. I was intubated again. Lisa didn't even show up at the hospital that day. George swallowed hard. The tension filled the room. It was as if the air became heavier. It was then that I knew. I couldn't keep it inside anymore. I needed to talk to her. I needed to hear it from her mouth. I needed, even if it hurt, to hear the truth. I picked up the landline because I still couldn't type well on my cell phone. I dialed her number. I knew she would answer. She always did. Lisa was the type of person who liked to seem composed, even elegant, in crises. She answered on the 4th ring. Hello? Lisa, it's me. There was a pause. David, are you home? I am. How are you feeling? Weak, but conscious. Enough to ask questions. She was silent. And I continued. Are we doing this over the phone, or do you have the courage to come here and look me in the eyes? Now's not a good time, David. I'm on the move. I laughed. A dry laugh, without humor. On the move? Where to? Another getaway with Jennifer? Don't start with that, please. Don't start? Lisa, you were in Napa while I almost died from a hospital infection. You traded me for a neighbor. You emptied our account. My voice cracked on the last sentence. My throat tightened. How could you? Silence. She hesitated. I deserve to be happy. Those words, those 4 words. They didn't come as a slap. They came like a dull shot. A snap inside me, almost inaudible but devastating. I deserve to be happy. I hung up. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just let the phone slip from my hand and fall to the floor. That sentence killed me in a way the car accident never could. It wasn't a physical death, it was something deeper. A kind of emotional bankruptcy, as if the man who once loved Lisa had been buried right there, in that moment, with that phrase being the final shovel of dirt over the coffin. George entered the room, probably having heard my raised voice. He saw me sitting still, the phone on the floor, my eyes fixed on the empty wall. So? He asked, carefully. I took a few seconds to respond. When I finally spoke, my voice was low, hoarse. She said, she deserved to be happy. George leaned against the wall and crossed his arms. He stayed silent for a while before responding. Sometimes people think happiness is about throwing away everything they've built, just because it's easier than fixing it. I kept thinking about that. How 30 years can be erased on a whim. How I deserved to be happy can serve as an excuse for abandonment, betrayal, emotional and financial theft. But it wasn't just that Lisa took from me. She took my peace, my identity, my history. and left me here, sitting amid the ruins of a marriage that only existed in my mind. But there, in the deep silence of the house, something began to change. A small spark, a desire, not for revenge, but for rebirth. I knew it wouldn't be easy, that the pain would return many times. But I also knew that if I wanted a new life, I would need to bury the old one once and for all. And it was that day, with the words, "I deserve to be happy," still echoing in my ears, that I began to write my own worthiness, not for her, but for me. George, with his relentless patience and almost monastic way of acting, didn't stop. While I tried to gather the pieces of myself amidst the rubble of a life I no longer recognized, he dug deeper. He did what I couldn't, or maybe didn't want to do. He gathered documents, dug through old records, searched through statements, cross-referenced dates and amounts. Without me asking, he became a sort of private investigator, a silent, determined angel of truth. "This doesn't make sense," he said one afternoon with a handful of printed sheets scattered across the table in the living room. I watched from a distance, still weak, with slow movements and a mind numb from everything I had lived through. "Look at the transfers. Every month on the same day a fixed amount left the joint account, and it appeared in this other statement, in an account under Lisa L. Monroe's name, but at an investment bank where you two never had anything together." "She said it was to pay the condo taxes," I muttered as if my own voice was betraying me. "Or for car maintenance, I trusted." George looked at me with a mix of compassion and respect. "She was using your name, Uncle. She filled in the justifications as if you had authorized each withdrawal. I confirmed it with the manager. It's all documented." "This is a crime," I said, more to myself than to him. George nodded. "Yes, and you don't need to take revenge. You just need to show the truth." Those words echoed inside me for days. Show the truth. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because justice sometimes is the only way to finally bury what consumes us. It took time, more than I expected, gathering everything, registering it in court, cross-referencing data, consulting lawyers. George handled it all, always silent, always meticulous. I just watched. I felt useless, I confess. But little by little, I understood that letting him handle it was also a form of strength. A strength I no longer thought I had. Until one day the phone rang. It was from the court. The case had been accepted. Lisa and Jennifer would be formally summoned to testify in a hearing. I sat there, in the armchair in the living room, with the phone still in my ear even after the call ended. Something inside me shifted. It wasn't joy. It wasn't fear either. It was something else. A deep cold, as if I were about to face the final bend in a road I never asked to be on. On the day of the hearing, George drove. I wore a pressed blue shirt and my fabric pants, the ones she gave me years ago, with the argument that a man of respect dresses with dignity. Ironic, I thought. If dignity were clothing, she would have been walking naked for a long time. The courthouse was a gray, cold building with the smell of old paper and reheated coffee, the kind of place where truths are exposed and masks fall. We sat in the second row. The front table was occupied by Lisa and Jennifer. Seeing them there together was like watching a twisted version of my life. Lisa wore a beige suit, her hair tied back, her posture impeccable. Jennifer looked out of place, with a tense expression, her eyes darting from side to side as if searching for an emergency exit. The judge entered. Everyone stood. My heart beat like a drum inside my chest. I didn't know what to expect. Part of me still wanted to hear an explanation, an apology. Anything that would prove there was, somewhere deep inside, a trace of the woman I had slept with for over 3 decades. But none of that came. George handed over the documents, organized in numbered folders, each with attachments, evidence, dates, testimonies, and authorizations. The prosecutor spoke firmly: bank fraud, misappropriation of joint resources, digital signature manipulation, breach of trust in a domestic partnership. The word crime was used more times than I would have liked. The judge flipped through each page with impenetrable seriousness. Then she gave the floor to Lisa. She stood up, adjusted her skirt, and tried to smile. Your Honor, all of this has been a big misunderstanding. I took care of my husband for years. When he had the accident, I thought he wouldn't survive. I went into mourning. And yes, I got close to Jennifer. But it was never with the intention of hurting anyone. The transfers were made with mutual agreement and the judge raised her hand. Ms. Monroe, the documents show the absence of any authorization signed by your husband. There are even manipulations of justifications in his name when he was already incapacitated by coma. This constitutes ideological falsification. Lisa lost her composure. She stammered. Jennifer, sitting beside her, looked at her as if it was the first time she had seen that woman. You said he authorized it, Jennifer whispered through clenched teeth. Jennifer, please, Lisa murmured. No, Lisa, you told me he knew, that everything was fine. I got into this for you. The judge banged the gavel. The parties must restrain themselves or will be removed from the room. Chaos hung in the air for a few seconds. Then the silence returned, thick and suffocating. The session ended shortly after. Both were formally notified of the investigation. The case would proceed. Nothing would be resolved there, but the truth had already been exposed. As we left the building, the morning sun seemed to mock the scene we had just lived through. I walked slowly, like someone carrying their own invisible coffin. George, by my side, offered me a coffee. I refused. I needed silence. And then, Uncle? He asked after a while. I took a deep breath. I looked at the horizon, trying to understand what I was feeling. It's not about winning, George. It never was. It's about closing the chapter. Knowing that this time I wasn't buried in silence. He nodded, he squeezed my shoulder firmly, and we kept walking, because despite the pain, the loss, and the betrayal, I was still alive. And now, with the truth on my side, finally free. There is no glory in watching the end of a story that began with love and ended with betrayal. No joy, no toast, no cinematic finale where the hero is applauded. But what exists, and this I can say with the certainty of someone who's been through hell, is liberation. When the hearings were over, when the masks had fallen, and the weight of their actions became impossible to deny, Lisa and Jennifer began, at last, to face the consequences. Lisa, who once looked at me with that air of almost maternal superiority, left the courtroom with her eyes lowered and her steps dragging. I later found out that Jennifer had distanced herself from her, breaking all ties. Maybe she realized she had been used, or maybe she just didn't want to share a prison cell with someone who lied even to those she claimed to love. They were charged with fraud, misappropriation of assets, and above all for destroying a lifetime of trust. The sentences, as in many cases like this, weren't as harsh as they should have been. But the public shame, the judgment from friends, the look in the eyes of their own family, that was a sentence neither of them could escape. And me? I found myself in front of the void, a space that had once been occupied by a marriage, a life together, a history built with bricks I thought were made of affection and respect. Now it was nothing but rubble. But strangely, breathing among those ruins hurt less than continuing to live in a lie. George remained by my side, my quiet angel, the kid who had grown up before my eyes and, in my darkest moments, became my beacon. He didn't demand deep conversations. His firm presence was enough, the way he quietly filled the kettle to prepare my afternoon tea, or left the newspaper open on the sports section, knowing it was the only part I still read with enjoyment. Have you thought about traveling, Uncle? He asked one day while washing the dinner dishes. Travel? I repeated, as if hearing a foreign word. Yeah. Go somewhere new, a place for yourself, without memories. I thought for a moment. I don't think I've ever traveled alone. George smiled, not taking his eyes off the soapy plate. Maybe it's time. And it was. Slowly, I began to disconnect from the image of a broken man. I started to see myself for the first time in a long time as someone whole, even if with scars. I began to live again in the small details. A slow coffee at a bakery downtown, a walk among the dry autumn leaves with the wind on my face and no obligation pulling me home. There was one morning in particular. I remember it like it was now. I was sitting on a park bench, watching a group of children chasing a dog. The sky was clear, the air slightly chilly. An elderly woman passed by me, stopped, and offered me a smile. "This is the first time I've seen you here," she said. "Yeah, the first time I'm really here," I replied. She nodded, as if she understood exactly what I meant. Life is like that. Sometimes we survive everything, only to find out we can still begin again. That phrase stayed with me for days. Surviving to start over. I had survived an accident, a coma, the betrayal of someone who promised to love me until the end. But most of all, I had survived myself. The days when I wanted to give up. The nights when the bed felt too big. The silences that screamed louder than any argument. And it was at this point in the journey that I understood something essential. It wasn't Lisa I needed. It never was. It wasn't the marriage, nor the promises. It wasn't the two-story house, nor the car in the garage, nor the framed photos in the hallway. It was me. It was the man I had stopped being to please, to yield, to keep the peace. The strength I had been lacking had always been here, hidden beneath layers of concessions and swallowed silences. It just needed to be called by its name. And I called it. I called it when I decided not to hate. When I chose forgiveness, not for them, but for myself. When I left the past where it belonged and looked at the future with clear eyes. A few weeks later, I decided to take George's advice. I got in the car and drove to Astoria, a small town in northern Oregon, where the Columbia River meets the Pacific. I stayed at a simple inn, facing the sea. I walked along the pier, talked to fishermen, ate fresh fish straight from the grill. No one there knew me, and because of that, I started to get to know myself again. One of those nights, I wrote a letter, not to Lisa, not to Jennifer, but to myself. David, you survived, and now, you will live. I signed it with my own handwriting, folded the paper and placed it inside the copy of the old man and the sea I had brought with me, a symbol, perhaps, of the man who fought against the currents until he had no strength left, but who still made it home. Today, sitting on the porch of my home, a new home, smaller, just mine, I can breathe without tasting the bitterness of the past. I put on an old record, pour my coffee slowly, and watch the trees sway outside. George comes to visit me from time to time. He brings books, laughter, sometimes an apple pie he swears he made himself, though the smell betrays the supermarket. And together we talk about life like two men who know the value of what cannot be bought: dignity, presence, truth. And that's why I can say, with a steady voice and a calm heart, my name is David Monroe. I am 55 years old. I survived an accident, a coma, and abandonment. But above all, I survived myself. And that indeed was the greatest miracle of my life, because there are rebirths that don't require graves, only the courage to keep breathing.